thank you for attending. It's open to the public today. We have had no petitions or questions from members of the public. This will be obviously on the webcast as well, so welcome to people there. A few housekeeping rules. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so that as to not disturb the conduct of the meeting. You'll be pleased to know there's no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is Tudor Square. Before I ask individual members to introduce themselves, I'd just like to make a couple of further comments. You may or may not be aware, but we've had a change in structure in the committee. Councillor Marianne Elliott has taken over as Deputy Chair. I look forward to working with her. And Councillor Janet Riddler has become the group spokesperson. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you, Janet, for all the support you've given me in the first 6 months of this campaign, this committee. I'd also like to welcome a new member, Councillor Gary Wetherall, who isn't actually here yet. I don't know if he's planning to attend, but he's representing the new group within the council. With that said, could I ask each individual member to introduce themselves, and then I will ask the officers to introduce themselves as and when they speak. Thank you. Howard.
Yeah, good afternoon. Councillor Anne Hooper, Councillor for West Ecclesfield Ward.
Councillor Robert Rice, Councillor for the East Ecclesfield Ward.
Councillor Karen McGowan, Burley Ward.
Councillor Tony Downing, Mossborough Ward.
Councillor Janet Riddler, Stocksbridge and Upper Don.
Councillor Bernard Little, Councillor for Walkley.
Marion Elliott, Green Councillor for Leadless Valley.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to the agenda. Apologies for absence. Have we had any?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2 is exclusion of the public and press. There is a closed part of the report at item 8 in the agenda, which is not available to the public and press because it contains exempt information described in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Governments Act of 1972, as amended, relating to the financial and business affairs. The committee are therefore asked to formally exclude the public and press for the discussions on this item to allow for more consideration of the sensitive information. On that basis, what I'd like to recommend is that we move item 8 to the end of the committee. It's just if there's anybody from the public who is attending, I always think it's a little bit crazy to ask them to leave for a period and then come back in. So are you happy with that? Okay, that's been agreed. Thank you. I'm a bit concerned about the curtains, but I'm sure we'll get through it. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest on the items on the agenda for today? On that basis, I should take silence as a confirmation that there isn't any. Okay, item 4 is minutes of the last meeting, and I'll just go through it page at a time, and if you want to raise a point, please let me know. It's page 11 of the report, which I should now count. Well, I'll do it the way the pages on the page 11. Page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Page 15. And page 16, which is 6 of 6. No comments, they're duly approved. Thank you. Item 5, public questions and petitions. As I said earlier, we've had none. Item 6, members' questions. We've had none, so thank you very much. Item 7, which is page 17 of the agenda pack, this is the work programme. I'll hand over to Rachel now.
Thank you, Chair. Starting on page 17 of the agenda pack, the work programme is set out for forthcoming meetings. Section 2, highlights references from council or other committees. You can see in there is something and there is action proposed that is written out for you to see. If we leaf over to page 20, Appendix 1 of the work programme sets out any proposed additions and amendments that have happened to the work programme since the last meeting. And page 21, Appendix 3 sets out the agenda items for forthcoming meetings. So I will now pass back to Chair to lead over to see if we want to talk about anything to do with this work programme moving forwards.
Does anybody have any queries or comments? Councillor Little.
Yes, I want some clarifications, please. Two, where are we with the informal work to develop a series of specific committee statements for the council's overarching climate statement? What are we actually asking here in order to reduce climate emissions and adapt to climate change? Is this being done? I understand that the work is being done, but it's being done informally. And I'd like to know a bit more about that, please. Thank you. I've got one more question after.
Take that afterwards, Bernard. Lisa.
Hi, Councillor Little. I've got an outstanding action to contact Councillor Williams, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Ridler about those statements that have been drafted. I got that over to me on Thursday or Friday last week. So I will contact Chair as advised by the team that are pulling those statements together and take it from there. But I have got them now, the draft statements, and so that's sitting with me currently, and then I'll share them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And my second question, are we identifying areas of land that could be used to develop renewable energy? And could these be and then if so, can these be categorised as invest to save?
I'm not sure, in short, that there are different areas of land, and we will need to work with our colleagues in property services who are the actual land managers to identify those. So can you leave that action with me, and then I'll update you with a proper answer.
I do understand that within our plan, passed at full council, it says that we should be identifying parcels of land within our wards across the city suitable for renewable energy.
Yeah, I'll take that away. I'm just not sure where we've got to with that yet.
Okay, Councillor McGowan.
It's not a question, it's just to say a thank you to the staff actually that did the leisure visits for us. I thought they were really, really valuable. And same for libraries, when we've done libraries. I just want to say a public thank you, because I know a lot of effort and time went in, and it was really, really enlightening and helps when we're making decisions. So thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would ask members if they can. I know we have other commitments, and the dates we choose aren't always convenient, but if they can make the effort as much as possible to make those meetings or visits, I think members who have been on them invariably say that was really interesting, I've learnt a lot, it puts the whole thing in context. And it does take an awful, on behalf of Leslie but also the officers, it does take an awful lot of getting the dates and diaries sorted out, so thank you. Okay, on that basis, we'll now move to the formal decisions. As I said earlier, item 8 about budgets will do at the end after the briefings. So I'd like to go to item 9, which is...
I have got one more question. I just missed it. I've forgotten. It was on page 28. It's about the public engagement toolkit. Are we using this toolkit with the task and finish group, for example? I'd like to see us, pursue this. It's very innovative. It was in the original idea after the referendum that formed the committee system. Yes, I think we need to push ahead with this, and like a response, really.
Well, I think if you spoke to your colleague, Councillor Elliott, who I believe chairs that task and finish group, her thoughts on whether she would want to include that, but it makes sense to me. Okay, so item 9, the Asylum Dispersal Grant, and I'd like to invite Jason Siddle and Beth Storm to come forward and present this. And could you just introduce yourselves, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jason Siddall. I'm the Head of Communities in the Communities portfolio.
I'm Beth Storm. I'm the Strategic Lead for Asylum, working for Jason in the Communities portfolio. Good afternoon.
The Neighbourhoods portfolio of the Communities team. Thank you. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read the paper prior to the meeting today, but I'll just summarise for those of you that may not have had a chance to or may just need a reminder. The purpose of the report that we're presenting today, some of you may recall, or the committee may recall, that myself and Beth came to the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee last year, probably around this time, where we brought a paper around the Asylum Dispersal grant, and that was a grant that's provided to the City Council by the government, which the spirit of it, I guess, is to mitigate the impact of asylum in the city. So in the report it sets out what the grant's purpose is, etc. But you may recall that we proposed how we spend that money last year, and the committee agreed how we spend that money. And again, the details in the report as a reminder in terms of what was agreed last year. So we're a further year on, and we have received further grant from the government. And so we are here today to seek approval from the committee in terms of the recommendations that are set out in the paper. So I'll just briefly go over that, just as a reminder. So on page 5 of the report, you will see that this year we've received a further £1,009,500 in grant, and the paper sets out what we propose to spend that money on. So we're seeking approval to allocate the dispersal grant in line with the recommendations. In the paper as well, you will see that there's an element of that money, 224,500, that we're seeking approval from the committee in terms of giving or allowing delegated authority to the Director of Communities to spend that money. The reason for that is because the situation with asylum migration just nationally, I'm sure you're all aware of from information that you will have received. We need to be flight of foot on the ground in terms of responding to some of the issues that are happening. It's an ever-changing picture. There's increased demand in the city from the policies around asylum migration, and we need to be able to respond to that. So we're asking the committee to agree delegated authority, as I say, to the Director of Communities to spend that additional pot of money, which is 224,000. The rest of it, you will see that there's a proposal split out over 2 years. Year 1, 385, and year 2, 400,000. And that is essentially for the staff resources that were required to actually manage the function. My colleague today, Beth, is here. She works on her own, essentially, with one other member of staff. Dealing with this area of work. There's increased demand, increased pressures in this area, and we need to think about how we resource this function properly moving forward. Some of you may recall the pre-dispersal grant. We never received any funding at all from central government, and so the work that Beth and her colleague did was funded temporarily. The dispersal grant gives us the opportunity to embed that team and expand that team so that we can deal with this particular situation in the correct way. We don't feel that we've got the right level of resources currently to do that. So you can see in the paper there we set out proposals for how we spend that money on that staff resource. Essentially, I think that's it. I mean, in terms of the recommendations, I guess we're asking for you to approve what I've just asked for, really, so that the grant, and so that we can continue to use the grant until March 26. Approve the decision to ring fence part of the grant for director discretion, and approve the decision to appoint dedicated resources to work for the benefit of the people seeking asylum, the migrant community in Sheffield and the wider sanctuary cohort. So Beth's here as the subject matter expert. I will try to answer any questions that you've got, or we will both together. So back to the committee and chair for any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Thank you for the report, comprehensive, and I think personally something we really need to be looking at with the stresses on the asylum and immigration system, and how we welcome people in this city in a kind of a welcoming and supportive way. On the 224,500 discretionary spend that's going to be going to the directorship, do you what sort of things would you envisage this being used for? Is it for extra flexibility in terms of staffing costs? Is it for kind of facilities? Is it for kind of sundries? Just give us a little bit of a picture as to what that might be part of.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. Yeah, in answer to your question, I guess it's all of the above that you've mentioned potentially. So it could be that we need additional staffing resources moving forward. I think part of the thinking around this is how we can support our voluntary sector, because the voluntary sector are quite key, as you would imagine, in this space. We've got partners in the city that work tirelessly with the asylum cohort, and we want to be able to support our voluntary sector partners as well moving forward. How that looks is quite difficult to predict because, as I mentioned before, it's an ever-changing picture. You know, there's I think it's fair to say that you know, we are receiving requests for information on a very regular basis in terms of you know, the numbers or the quota for the city and what we're expected to be able to take into the city, and we've got to do work around that. And you know, Beth and as I say, a colleague are constantly being asked for pieces of work, and we need to be able to resource that. So it could be additional staffing resources, but I think what we've got to do is just look at the wider asylum cohort and ask ourselves what we need to do over the next couple of years, and part of that will be supporting the voluntary sector to do the important work that they do. So I envisage that an element of that money will be used for that.
And secondary on that, so this 224,500 would be across the 2 years?
Potentially, Councillor Rees, yeah. It just depends what might happen in the future. It may be that there's a reason to spend that all in 1 year, or year 1 or year 2, or it's spread across both. I guess the spirit of it is that we are light of foot, and the director is able to make those decisions as she sees fit, or that person sees fit. So currently she. Obviously in consultation with finance colleagues and potentially with partners in the city as well.
Brilliant. I'd just like to ask, would it be possible for you, when money is spent out of this discretionary, for it to be illustrated and kind of returned to a report on what that's spent on, returned to the committee kind of at a regular basis, and we can have discussions as to how frequently this is, just so we can be making sure that there is scrutiny as to how this money is being spent. Not that I would say that any of us would question your judgment, but like just as a bit of an audit. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think that's the right and proper thing to do, and absolutely, yes, we'll return and update you on the spend. And of course, outside of the committee process, we can have discussions with you as required in terms of what that money is intended to be spent on.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a number of people who've indicated to speak. Councillor Elliott first.
Thank you, Chair. Follows on quite nicely from that, actually, because I was going to ask about the partner organisations as well. So when we agreed to the the grant funding last year. So as well as resourcing the asylum function within the council, we agreed to one-off payments to the City Sanctuary and Spring project. So I just wondered if you could provide us with a bit of an update about this. Did they receive the grants? And is the Spring project able to sort of continue in the longer term? Do you know?
Thank you for that question. As you rightly point out, we committed that each of those two organisations would receive money. For Spring at that time, their continuation was really quite contingent on not only the money that the Asylum Dispersal funding would provide, but also money from other schemes and other partners. That money is still committed to Spring. Currently, we are just ironing out the very last details with legal services in order to release that money. We are in regular dialogue with Spring to update them on the progress of that. What we did for both of those partners, for both Spring and City of Sanctuary, is in drafting effectively the annex to because they're both core funded as well. They both receive a small amount of core funding. So what we did is provided the asylum dispersal funding as an annex to that core funding agreement. And what that has looked like is we've worked really closely with them to make that annex process very robust. And part of that is asking them to really work with us. I digress slightly, but it is relevant. What we have collectively with partners is a view that what we need to understand is, are the services provided across the city the right services for the right people? Because as we know, the asylum cohort, the refugee group, they're not static, and what may have been pertinent to supply or provide 2 or 3 years ago might not be the right thing now as languages change, nationalities change, makeup changes. For example, we have a lot more families in the city now. So what we agreed with both those partners, and is written into that agreement, is effectively a process where they will both look for a quarter, the same quarter, at who their client bases are, and we will collectively assess that to review if the services they're providing are demonstrably still the correct services, or if they need to be adapted in some way. That then goes on to open a much wider conversation, which plays a little bit into the point of your colleague about what needs funding and how it is funded, because we know it's a perpetual issue in the city about the funding. We know that we as an organisation, as Sheffield, cannot provide everything that sector needs to support this vulnerable cohort. So that is providing us with a really tangible evidence base to have a proper conversation, not just as a city, but with other funders about what is required to support the migrant, refugee and asylum communities. So that's a very long way of saying, yes, that funding is still in train. We're ironing out the last little detail with legal, and it has been a fairly, certainly a lengthier process than either of us had hoped in order to get that agreement in place and work very closely with our partners to write something into those agreements that would be deliverable, relevant and robust.
Thank you for the comprehensive answer. That's really helpful. And with the provision of the open grant pot, so was that distributed? Did you have lots of applicants? Was it enough?
No, it's not been distributed yet, is the straightforward answer to that. So, as Beth said, it's an ever-changing picture, and we want to make sure, Councillor Elliott, that we get that open grant pot right. There's still a commitment there for us to look at that for the city. And as I talked earlier in answer to Councillor Reese's question, we want to support the voluntary sector with some of the money. I think it's fair to say the challenges that we've had with getting the other grants, as Beth's just explained, have kind of gotten in the way of us launching that open grant pot. But it's something we're committed to and something we're working on. Just to know that there is no requirement, as there are with some grants and some funding streams, to spend the money by the year end, so we can roll forward any underspends in previous years. So if we don't spend the grant pot this year, the open grant pot, or we don't get that done, then the money will roll forward, so we won't lose the money. But we're very much committed to making sure that that happens. But I have to report that we've not made it happen so far this year, but it's on the list of priorities to try to achieve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGowan.
I think you've answered some in a roundabout way while you've been answering the others. I just wondered what lessons we'd learn over the last year and anything that moving forward. I'm presuming lack of staff is one of them and that you need more staff. Yeah. Another one was about, you said about supporting voluntary sector. I was just wondering about supporting them in what way. Is that in training? I don't know what they need. I'm not quite clear on what we're doing. And are we measuring the impact that this is having on people's lives, and is it improving? Which then brings me on to the bit that you've just come in at the end, which said about rolling the money forward. And there was a slight concern there, thinking we've got people out there needing this and needing this support now, and I don't want us hanging on to money that they could be benefiting from. So although I understand what you're saying and we need to get it right and everything, it was just there's so many people out there needing help.
Apologies, thank you for those questions. I'll do my best to pick up on all of the points. If I miss anything, please do remind me. I think in terms of lessons learned, I think you've highlighted the main lesson we've learnt this year, hence the recommendations in this paper. And it also picks up on Councillor Elliott's point about the open grant pot. There are 2 of us in this function. There is enormous, I know everybody, you know, I don't want to be that officer that comes and sits and tells you how busy I am and all this priority. We could all say that, I get that, but genuinely there are 2 of us in an extremely busy, fluid, fast-paced function. Part of, well, the main tenet of our approach is that we try to work really constructively, cohesively and communicatively with all our partners, whether that be Home Office, DWP, Health, whoever. And that takes a lot of physical resource on top of a very high operational demand, on top of a very high strategic demand, because what we're looking at in this work is not just what's happening today, and as you rightly point out, there is a huge amount of need, but it's what the city as a whole, what our host community, as well as this cohort of people, is going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years. So, you know, what impact will it have on infrastructure? So there's a very big landscape. You're right, there is a significant amount of acute need. It's very difficult as Sheffield City Council to objectively say what the impact of this activity is. And there are a number of reasons. I think the key reasons for that difficulty is, as I've outlined, the approach. The people who come to the city either as refugees or and particularly as asylum, they're not our service users. So it's different to people in the host community that we can have a very direct cause and effect on. So for example, when somebody comes on asylum, they are the responsibility of the Home Office. On a local level, they are the responsibility of the accommodation support provider, MEAS. We don't directly interface with those service users at all because they're not ours. We're kind of borrowing them and hosting them effectively. What we are trying to do is give them the least worst experience of asylum while they're in Sheffield. That's really, really important to us as a city. And the way we do that is by working closely with the people who do work with them directly. So we have very good relationships with MEAS and the Home Office, which gives us not as much leverage as we would like because it's in a national policy context, but as much leverage as I think we can probably have on a local level. We also work very closely with VCFS partners and Health who do have that direct interface. Part of what I'd spoken previously about was about the effectively the measurement, the audit, the whatever you want to call it, that our voluntary, 2 of our key voluntary partners are doing, and that is part of how we will know objectively what difference is being made in the city, and part of that difference is what is being funded through the Asylum Dispersal function. So when I'm not at a point, honestly, that I can sit and say to you, right, this is the difference in a metric. I could give you lots of anecdotal evidence, but by next spring, I will be able to sit and tell you objectively what difference Sheffield have made, part of which is funded through the Asylum Dispersal Grant. Does that pick up everything you raised? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. Beth, thanks for the report. Are we still attending to and helping people from Ukraine?
Yes, there is still work happening, as I understand it, in the organisation to support Ukraine. I was very heavily involved in that for the first probably 8 or 9 months. That work is led in housing. That's simply because they are refugees, not people seeking asylum, and it's an organisational split. So if there is something specific in reference to that, I'm really happy to link you up with appropriate colleagues who can get in touch with you to deal with any queries.
Yeah. Thank you much. Is there somewhere where we can find more information about the City of Sanctuary and Spring? I mean, you explained with Marion's question, but where could we, or I could, find more information about actually what they're doing regarding this work?
If you would specifically like to, I'm very happy to facilitate a face-to-face discussion. Spring and City of Sanctuary are always very, very welcoming of Sheffield City Council, of elected members. They're very happy to talk about their work, what they do, demonstrate the difference it's making. I would highly recommend, if you can, that you go to the drop-in at Victoria Methodist Church on a Wednesday, where you can see firsthand the phenomenal work that partners across the city are doing. And I'm really happy to facilitate that with you if that would be something that would be helpful.
Thanks for that. And then thirdly, just a comment really. Right from the beginning, when in my ward at Staindrop Lodge, you were involved. It was I can remember it. I was actually on holiday and we did a Zoom. I think it was a year as last May. And the Home Office imposed that they were going to use Staindrop Lodge as an asylum hotel. Very difficult. There was no consultation. It just happened. But we had the meeting with you and the Home Office. And since then, it's progressed to a really good outcome, both for the City Council, I think, and certainly for the people that are in Staindrop Lodge, the families. One of my concerns with them, we get sort of weekly reports of comings and goings and incidents, but we never know really how long people have been in there. So that would be one of my worries, really, because they're living in a small hotel room, and it may be a mother, father, or carers, a number of children in a small hotel room for how many weeks, which is not really suitable. But myself, I'm really pleased that up there that the local community and different organisations have tried to make those people in there have a better life while they're here. And I think that's probably down to you and the manager down at from Mears up at Staindrop. But thank you very much. But from a very stormy start, sorry, the people in there I think have got a reasonable living standard. They are supported in various churches and other things, yeah. And I think it's been very difficult as well to accommodate the young children into nurseries and schools, because they all seem to fall on 1 or 2 schools in the area. And there's a difficulty of language and everything else. But I think all in all, Sheffield City Council and yourself have done a very good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that feedback, and thank you as well to yourself and Mike and Anne, who have worked so constructively and right from the get-go have been incredibly supportive of the people in Staindrop and really helped the community, and I know have shown leadership in that community to really make those people feel welcome. And I think a lot of that outcome is down to yourself and your colleagues as well, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Little.
Yes, thank you very much again for the report. I note on page 47 that a climate impact assessment has not been undertaken. What resources would you have needed to make that assessment, being able to provide that? Because I'm aware that it's not through neglect that this has been done. It's just lack of resources. What would you have needed to be able to provide a climate impact assessment?
Thank you. Councillor Little, I think you've answered the question by asking the question in some respects, yeah. I mean, I think we took advice on whether we needed a climate impact assessment for this particular report, and the advice was that we didn't. However, I take on board what you're saying. In answer to the question, yes, the team is under-resourced, as we've explained, and, you know, therefore, you know, having the capacity to do additional work has been very challenging, but we're hoping that that can be addressed through the decision that's made today.
I think also, Councillor, if I may just come in, part of this I think touches on what I raised to Councillor McGowan, is these are not our service users. So I'm by no means suggesting there is not a climate impact of this cohort and of this work, but I think it does put our organisational climate impact is lessened by the fact that we have absolutely no option over who comes to our city. We have no option where they stay. We have no option about the environmental impact of the circumstances in which they stay, how their food is provided, how they're accommodated. So it's part of that assessment was about separating out what is ours and within our gift, and not negating that there is an impact, but actually what is outside of the City Council's control.
I think what I'm trying to drive at here is that the climate impact, the issue we're dealing with here is going to get bigger and bigger each year, and we need to be projecting into the future according to the models that we're provided with. You know, many people are internally displaced in the countries that they're coming from, but many more are going to be externally displaced. And you know, by rights, I feel we should be taking those people, but I'm not sure where that, you know, are we able to project into the future how much of that's going to cost and how we need to build this into our forward planning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's, if I may just, thank you, Lisa. I think that's a really excellent point, and I would dearly love to be able to project what numbers of people we were talking about, because you're absolutely right, displacement will continue for reasons of climate, for reasons of war, all sorts of things. You're absolutely right, sadly that will be a continuing trend. It's a continuing conversation I have with the Home Office. Obviously, you know, global events we can't predict, we can't predict the human impact there. But in terms of asylum, I continually have conversations with them about the flow and the pipeline of people, because clearly it's not only the immediate impact of that, but when people settle, make their lives here, have their own families, there is a much longer term impact as well. So to be able to do some projections on that would be really, really helpful, and I will continue to press them.
Did you want them to come in, Lisa?
Committee as well, so I'll stop shouting now. So exploring the impact of world events on the asylum and immigration policies of the UK and in turn in our communities and the climate statement. So we are considering that, and we will include it in those statements, which I will share with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any further comments or questions? No. In that case, there are a series of recommendations, which I shall read through for the benefit of people watching via the web, and then we'll go to we'll seek approval. The recommendation is that the Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee firstly approve the use of the grant to fund the continuation and development of the current SCC strategic asylum function in community service until March 2026. Secondly, approve the decision to ring-fence part of the grant from November 23 to March 26 for the purpose of responding flexibly to asylum and migrant community needs in Sheffield, along with the wider sanctuary cohort to support their integration. Point 3, delegate authority to the Director of Communities from November 2023 to March 2026 in consultation with the Director of Finance and Commercial Services and the General Counsel, and informed by and working with the voluntary community and faith sectors regionally and nationally to make decisions on the allocation of funds from the grants to meet the aims and objectives outlined in this report. And finally, approve the decision to appoint dedicated resources to work for the benefit of people seeking asylum, the migrant community in Sheffield and the wider sanctuary cohort in accordance with Table 1. Are we all agreed? Thank you. Sorry. Yes, that is resolved unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the report and the work you do. Just to reiterate what Alan Hooper said, but the sentiment has been from all the members. It's a fantastic job. It's something that Sheffield should be very proud of. And it would be very easy to have perhaps got it slightly wrong, and you haven't. You've done a really great job, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Item 10 is allotment rents. I'll ask the officer team to come up and present, and please introduce yourselves for the cameras.
Hi everyone, I'm Rowan Longhurst, the Service Manager for Countryside in the Parks and Countryside Service.
And I'm Ruth Bell, Head of Parks and Countryside.
So the purpose of this report is to seek approval for an increase in the allotment rent and water charges for 2025-26 at a rate of 5.96%, which is below the current inflation. Just as a reminder, these rents are set over a year in advance due to the notice that we're required to give tenants. So I'll just outline some of the key parts of the report that I hope you've been able to read, and be pleased to take any questions associated with it. So due to the current cost of living crisis and abnormally high levels of inflation, we consulted again a second year in a row on the proposed rental rises. We thought this was the best thing to do based on high levels of inflation, but in 2018 it was agreed that as standard rents would increase in line with inflation. So we sought a response and we consulted with all tenants. An online survey was available and hard copies of the survey were distributed, and we also consulted with our allotment advisory group, which has representatives from allotment societies and the Sheffield Allotment Federation as well. We proposed, we asked tenants to let us know essentially between rates of 5 and 10% in 0.5 increments what levels of increase that they were prepared to pay or interested to pay, and clearly stated how we would use those results and that we would use the mean average of all of the results we received between 5 and 10%. So just a brief summary of the responses that we got. The highest response, probably unsurprisingly, was at the 5% rise. So that was obviously the lowest end of what we were proposing. That was 62.4% of our tenants. Interestingly, however, 8.6%, so the second highest result we got, was in favour of a 10% rise, which was the highest we were proposing. And as you can probably imagine, a distribution of the results in between that you can see. So the proposal was to go with the statistical mean average, which is the 5.96%, rounded to the nearest 5p. This was a slight deviation from how we approached last year. We took on feedback that we received from the consultation last year. Interestingly, though, we received a lower response rate from the survey. So this year, the overall engagement level was about 17.5%. We received a whole range of feedback that was also available for people to give us either separately outside of the consultation, but within the consultation. A snapshot of that is in the report. As you can probably anticipate, there was a whole range of views, and we really value the views that allotment holders gave us in that some very happy to pay at the proposed rates that we were stating at the highest end, obviously at the lowest end, and others who are less happy with the proposal of an increase. The main impact of a below inflation rate is that our site maintenance budget is what takes the hit. That's what's impacted the most. So we're able to maintain the current staffing levels within the team, but the enhancements to sites, the general security, waste removal, the kind of bare basics really that we have a limited budget for, that's generally what takes the impact of a reduced budget. We discussed at length in July, which was when the consultation started. So at that point it was at 6.8%, and obviously due just to the nature of the consultation and coming to you for a decision, that's the point where we start engaging with our tenants, obviously, so that we can have a decision to act on and be able to notify tenants with over 12 months notice. So this is why it's always set so far in advance. That's a requirement in their tenancy agreement. So if there aren't any further questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Councillor Downing.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Rowan. I once was on the Allotments Advisory Committee. I chaired it for 1 year, I believe it was. And what will this, with what you're proposing here, will there still be allowed to have some sort of reduction for like people who are on low incomes and people like that, people that's struggling to with the cost of living crisis? Is there still scope for that?
Yes, absolutely. So there are no proposed changes to our concessionary rates, which range from 25 to 75%. So we aren't proposing to change that at all. So absolutely, those who are eligible to claim a concessionary rate will absolutely be able to still claim that. And currently, about 40% of our tenants claim that rate out of about 3,200 tenants. 40% are claiming a concession between 25 and 75.
Can I come back, Chair? Thank you. I've had one or two people have spoken to me about different things they want doing on the allotment sites, and obviously the cost implication to that come into play. Is it just the bare minimum now that they can get by what you can provide? And what I'm trying to say is, I had a request for a small gate to be put in a Mossway allotment site, and I wrote to Caroline, the manager there, and they said that because of where things are with funding, it wasn't able to provide that sort of gate in that site.
So absolutely, we are always receiving maintenance and security. That's a really good example. At this time of year, or in fact our previous advisory group, is when we take that long list of site maintenance asked to the advisory group for a steer on how they think we should be spending the budget that we have. At this point in the year, we have a much clearer understanding of the total of the income that we're likely to get now for the full year, and that's when we start commissioning those works, tree safety works, etc. So those, we can't do everything, so things are prioritised. So this is the time of year, once we have a sense of the budget that we have, we will look at all of those asks in the context of all of the sites across the city. We do encourage societies where they exist. Not all sites have a society, but where they do exist, we encourage those societies to approach the LACs and other ward pots, so that it's not just our budget that we're accessing, but we do promote those opportunities, and we encourage groups to go to seek that funding. But certainly it is security, and site security is one of our priorities. As you can imagine, we want tenants to feel safe accessing their site. but across the 80 sites in the whole city, you know, we do have to prioritise, but now those sites are, all of those asks are coming in and we're looking at those in a holistic way.
Thank you. Councillor McGowan.
Yeah, it was just to say, you know, just looking through the comments where you put some positive comments about it, and I really I appreciate the fact that you put some, I was going to say not so positive, but I was just wondering how we were addressing that, because some of it sounds like a bit of lack of understanding, and I didn't know if there was something we could put out to explain what happens and how, and especially, I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but there was another authority that had put their rents up by 500%. And you can imagine the outcry there. I think we have taken the best approach at doing it every year instead of leaving it with no increase for years and years and years, and then suddenly doing a 500% increase was, you know, yeah. So I think we've done the right thing, and obviously we need to keep an eye on it because of the cost of living and why people are using these sites. But it's just about getting that message across to these people that don't fully understand.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think we're always really appreciative of the different channels and groups that we can disseminate information through. Certainly, the Allotment Advisory Group is that main consultative group and allows us to access tenants who might not normally be in touch with us over email. We send out a newsletter, and you know we can reiterate our approach in that. It's something that we'll be pulling together and sending out in the new year. So absolutely, that's an opportunity to remind people. Also, you know, new tenants who we're seeing so many new tenants at the moment. So we can absolutely just set out the basics in that so that people understand the approach we take and why. The advisory group. The site visits and when officers are out on site, you know, that we would love to have more visibility with the teams we've got. That's not always possible. But I think for us as well, it's quite a limited number. Well, surprisingly small percentage of our tenants are on email. So we're also trying to take that into account. They're not digitally connected. We try to manage the postal costs because they're also going up, so we try to limit the amount of printed comms that we send out, but really balancing that against the fact that we know that some of our tenants aren't on email. So yeah, I think any opportunity to update tenants on the approach we take, we really welcome the LACs again, different networks that we can share those updates on top of what we cascade. Thank you.
Thank you. The article I saw, it was 600%. Yeah, anyway. But a number of people have indicated to speak. Councillor Rice, then Councillor Little, and finally Councillor Hooper. So Councillor Rice.
I'll make this quick. Thank you for the report. Comprehensive, gives a good illustration of the work you've been putting in. Just a few more general questions about the allotment service and kind of how it's functioning. What is the current waiting list length of kind of to get an allotment, kind of in comparison to the number of allotments that are currently in the cycle?
It varies massively from site to site in different parts of the city. We do an annual waiting list re-registration that we're halfway through as we speak. So I'll happily give you an update on those stats once that re-registration has taken place. However, the last 2 years, i.e. post-COVID, when we've done those waiting list re-registrations, we're seeing the demand still higher than pre-COVID. So COVID, it absolutely soared, but we've sort of cleansed those lists twice now, and we're seeing waiting lists on every site in the city. The length of that list varies. The waiting time also varies depending on the size of the site. You can imagine the larger sites have a greater churn, so it might feel like a lot of people, but actually if it's a large list, a large site, we work through that. So it does, we don't have the up-to-date figures for this year at the moment. We're in the process of doing that re-registration as we speak, but I'll happily share those. But certainly, yeah, there are waiting lists on every site.
Oh, brilliant. And I should have turned my microphone off. Sorry about that. No, the other thing is just kind of, you mentioned the high number of people since COVID who are wanting to engage with the allotment and kind of get out there. It's great for health, great for kind of making sure that our biodiversity in the city is localised and kept as good as possible. Just on a purely kind of what's the word? Self-indulgent. Kind of, is there a process for us to be increasing the allotment kind of stock? Can we be looking at places in the city that have low levels of allotments? I've just kind of been talking with Councillor Hooper here as North of the City in Ecclesfield, as to maybe encouraging and kind of looking at council-owned property in our parks as potentially places we can be kind of growing an allotment scene.
Yes, absolutely. We have a statutory duty to provide this service, and certainly, as you can tell from what I've just said, we're not meeting the current demand. I mean, demand for land is, as we all know, really, really challenging and comes at a cost in its own right. So I think we're always keen to explore sites that already sit within the kind of council ownership, and if allotments is an appropriate kind of use for that site, we're all for it. And we also can see that, particularly from an environmental perspective, there are multiple benefits that you can gain from an allotment site. It's not solely about food growing, it's also about biodiversity and natural flood management. There are all sorts of ways that we can support a number of agendas in the creation of new sites. We have seen the greatest demand in the south of the city in terms of if we're to prioritise where those new sites go and the resources and the cost involved in establishing a site. That tends to be from the waiting list lengths in the south of the city. It used to be the southwest. It's shifted in the last year to the south, but we will have those fresh stats shortly, and then we can have a really good look at where that demand sits. But if you've got a sense of any bits of land, please do share them, and also the establishment of a new site costs money. It's not hugely expensive compared to other uses, but obviously there's still a cost, and there's still significant levels of engagement and consultation to carry out for local communities if we're going to establish a new site. But it's a priority for us to create more sites, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you.
Lisa.
Thanks. I can just add a little bit more to what Rowan said there, Councillor, is it is a priority. It's in Ruth and Rowan and her team's business plan for the service for this year, to look at where we can maximise the number of allotments. I think we said that last year, so we wrote this earlier in 2023, so in 2022 we're looking at a waiting list of 2,107 people on the waiting list, and that's gone up to 2,218 in 2023. So it's not gone up a significant amount, but there is a significant amount of people on the waiting list for an allotment. And as Rowan has said, that varies depending on the area of the city. It is a priority in terms of looking at our allotment strategy and finding new allotment plots.
Just one thing to add to that as well. We are, wherever possible, splitting plots as well to create that extra supply. So whilst the sites might not increase in footprint, some of our plots at their sort of standard full size are very big, and people are happy and in fact prefer to take on a smaller plot. So wherever practicable, which isn't always the case with the layout of sites, we are splitting plots to provide for more people. That interestingly doesn't necessarily provide us with high rents, so it doesn't increase our income. So we are seeing, and as the result of the team's work to split plots, we obviously have many more tenants to manage, but we're not collecting more rent as a result, because you just have two people effectively sharing the rent of what would have been a full-size plot. So it's created, we've absolutely been able to provide more for people and positively impact that waiting list, but it has impacted the overall workload of the team, who are now managing many more tenants than before, and many more new tenants, and an overall greater volume of work.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Little.
Thank you. Undoubtedly, the demand for allotments will increase, place to grow food will increase because of the cost of living crisis that isn't going to go away, unfortunately. Last year I asked the question in this meeting about the possibility of spreading the cost of an allotment across the year, and some work was going to be done on that. I understand it's practically and financially difficult to do that, but is it possible to use a direct debit at the beginning of the year so that there's something's been set up so somebody can pay to spread their commitment over the whole year, which will mean that the financial organisation within this establishment won't need to keep going back and sending them a reminder and stuff like that. Is that being looked at? So a direct debit that, say, commits them to a 12th of the rent throughout the whole year to do it each month.
We'll follow up on that. We'll ask the question, because I know the question has been asked about spreading the cost, but not necessarily in that direct debit way. So leave that with us and we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Thank you. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, very much the same process which we discussed last year, just to follow on. And I think the process which you outlined last year was good. Looking at page 67, it shows the increase from 2014, and then the minimal sort of cost of living increases up to 23. Due to inflation, it's gone up with the proposed for 25-26, 11.5%, but very difficult to predict inflation. But I think I welcome the report and welcome what you've done. Will be interesting to see when we get to 25-26 April, when it starts, what the inflation is and how good we are. But yeah, better than having a 600% increase. But thank you very much. Yeah, welcome the report and the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Downing, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just a quickie. Given what Lisa's just said, with what people wanting allotment sites, are you proactively looking now at where sites can be developed? Because if we have got a backlog of people wanting sites, that's an income that we could generate. And I just wondered if you were proactively looking at areas where we could put new sites. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, absolutely. I guess I would flag some of the other hats that I wear and some of the other demands for sites where we are always looking and always evaluating kind of the best use of opportunities. I will always try and seek opportunities where we can deliver on allotments, tree planting, biodiversity net gain, all of the other sort of spatial demands, not to mention the opinions of the users of those sites as they currently stand. And I think consulting with communities in the context of a new site is going to be, how we go about that. We really welcome your support and your ideas on that kind of chicken and egg of where we know there's demand because we've got a waiting list, and then that's focusing our efforts in terms of identifying sites. But then, how we then take that forward with local communities is, we really want to get that right. So if we can meet multiple demands on our land in one site, that's the winning formula, definitely.
Are there any further questions? If not, we'll move to the recommendation, which is that the committee approves a 5.96% increase to allotment rents for the years 2025-26. Are we all agreed? That has been unanimously approved. Thank you very much, and thank you for your report. Okay, we're now going to move over to the briefing and update sections. Item 11 is a briefing on the bereavement strategy. if you'd like to introduce yourselves, that would be great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ellie Fraser. I'm Head of Bereavement and Coronial Services.
Hi everyone, I'm Rob Swarbrick. I'm a graduate trainee within Bereavement and Coronial Services.
So thank you for having us here today. We're here to talk about what is a very important piece of work for us and we think for the city as a whole. The purpose of this report is to give you an update on that work and the reason we think we need that work, but then to hopefully invite your support, but also talk to you about how we get your involvement and engagement with it right from the outset. So, without repeating the report, Sheffield City Council is a burial authority for the purposes of burial and cremation. There is a bit of a legal backdrop in the report if anyone's interested on the history of how that comes about. But the upshot of it is that we, as an authority, have the power to deliver burials and cremations, and it's for us to determine locally what services or what service provision we need. In Sheffield, at the moment, the bereavement services run 16 cemeteries, 1 Gardens and Remembrance and 2 crematorium, and that's alongside a private-run crematorium up at Grenoside. We aim to deliver our services in a way that meet all the diverse religious and cultural needs of the people of this city, and I think largely we do that quite successfully. The problem that we've got is that over the last 15 years or so, we've gradually lost some direction as a service. And there's lots of contributing factors for that, but the outcome is that we've got outdated policies and therefore rules that we can't govern or enforce, which leads to inequality across the city and distrust with the public. We've lost connection with our customers and our stakeholders, and we have less of a clear understanding about what the need in the city is. Of course, the city has grown in terms of size, shape and diversity, and we've not been able to forward plan and to keep up with those changes. As a service, we've struggled to modernise, we've struggled to stay competitive in the parts of the business where there are private competitors, but yet, of course, we still provide the bits that are not commercially attractive to the private industry. Our buildings and into areas our services have deteriorated because that business model is not there. And as you've probably read, we are running out of burial space. In some parts of the city, that burial space really has been depleted and some of our cemeteries are now full. However, I must say we are not in a burial emergency at this point in time, although we will be if we don't start to do something about planning for our future now. And of course, the world is changing, and as a service, we've been head down. Obviously, we've had the pandemic that we've been through. We've been very responsive to delivering the kind of critical elements of our service, and we've not been forward-looking. The world has changed. For example, cemeteries are big green spaces, and we've not been able to explore the role that we can play in supporting the environment and understanding what the public sort of tolerance is to the spaces that we manage. So as a service, we've never had a strategy, and we think we need one. What we'd like to do is to deliver quite large-scale consultation across the whole city with the public so that we understand what people need and want from us, both now and in the future. And then we'd like to listen to what we hear, and we'd like to put that alongside our duties, any financial implications, and of course any other large agendas, and we'd like to turn that into a strategy for the next 25 plus years. We think that will give us the direction to enable us to make changes and improve what we have to offer. And then alongside this strategy work, we would like to start the work to find new cemetery sites. And we hope as the strategy progresses, when we start to find those sites, the two will come together so we can understand what we're going to offer from them. So that's our plan. We have recently recruited an officer to lead this work. And Rob, who sat next to me today, he's on our Future Leaders graduate programme. He's with us for the next 8 months and he will be working on this as well. So hopefully you support us. What we'd like to talk about is how you can become involved in that work from this stage and how you can shape what we do. What we think that should look like, but we'd be keen to hear your thoughts, is that obviously this committee would be the right place for decision making and general updates, but we know that our service affects everybody across the whole city, and we have members outside of this committee who have shown interest in elements of this work. So what we would like to do is set up some very specific task and finish groups to look at specific elements of the strategy. So for example, faith provision, nature, the business model, and we would like to invite all members to be part of that alongside relevant officers. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts.
Questions? Councillor Rice.
I've got two questions on very different things. What kind of work, and actually, firstly, welcome Rob to the council. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other over the next little bit as you kind of are on the future leadership programme. But firstly, how will demographic change in both faith, cultural background, but also health implications of the population, how will the statistics of those play into strategy? Have you got kind of an oversight as to the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years to make sure that we're looking forward rather than constantly being reactive to what's happening in our city?
So I don't have an answer to that sort of right now, but absolutely we need to have that forward look. So we need to make it inform the services that we offer. Rob and Murtazar, who is the other officer who's been appointed, he's on leave this week, I'm afraid, have started to do that. They've started to look at the census results, the future forecast direction, started talking to planning colleagues around the local plan, and to inform the work that we're doing. As I say, we are very much this sort of first stage of this work. Of course, the reason it affects what we do is because for very many different reasons, people have quite clear requirements about what they want for these services. Certain faiths only believe in burial, other people will lean towards cremation. There's quite a lot of criteria that people feel very, very strongly about, and we need to make sure that our services are able to meet those needs.
Thank you. And the second is on our heritage buildings that form part of our existing bereavement and kind of services. In particular, there's a columbarium up in my own ward that is has a number of disrepair to it, broken windows, kind of crumbling structures, leaking roofs, and trees growing out of places trees shouldn't grow out of. Will the maintenance of heritage buildings, because a lot of these buildings are absolutely gorgeous and beautiful bits of architecture, will that play into it and kind of trying to make our kind of cemeteries a place to go and kind of be in similar ways to parks are, rather than just somewhere you might ignore and walk around?
I sincerely hope so, is the answer to that question. We're acutely aware as a service, as I'm sure you can imagine, of the crumbling nature of the infrastructure that we've got around us. That's one example. There are many others. LACO, which is the local authority cemetery order, actually dictates that we should keep all our buildings in good upkeep and order. But the model that we've got for funding at the moment doesn't allow for that. We don't manage our own services and we don't have a budget for that. What I think we've got to explore is avenues where we can make income and how we get support to reinvest that back into some of this, as you say, beautiful architecture that is just crumbling around us.
Thank you. Can I just bring in Lisa?
So just to follow on from Ellie's response, it is about the heritage buildings, but it's about all of the buildings in the cemeteries, which I know you appreciate, and the accommodation review that the council is undertaking at the minute around community buildings and all council assets as well. It will feed into that as well. So hopefully the plan is that we look at our community buildings, our cemetery buildings, our parks buildings in the whole as well. So yeah, we certainly want them to be usable assets rather than derelict assets that people ignore. So we'll be feeding into those other pieces of work as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Hooper.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm quite amazed that Sheffield haven't got a bereavement strategy at this stage. There's various opportunities with this as well. When you come to the recommendations, there's no timescales on it. That will be useful to see where we're going. So if we're setting task and finish groups up, I think we need some timescales and when we're going to come back with a report when we've made progress. there are opportunities, and I do believe perhaps there are opportunities for friends of the cemeteries group, like the Friends of Parks, probably some revenue generation, if we look at it in various things. And Rob's not mentioned it, but in East Ecclesfield we've got the Burncross Cemetery and the building there that hopefully we can restore to some sort of usage. But there are opportunities. But I certainly would like to see some timescale. We don't want this drifting on for the next 2 years, even if it's only part of the strategy, but it's quite wide-ranging, and I look forward to what comes out of the other end of the sausage machine. Thank you.
We definitely want timescales. So what Ellie's seeking to do today is get your approval to press on and set those groups up, and with Rob and Murty, who isn't here, to start to put some timescales on this piece of work so we can actually come back to you with some tangible progress on it. We do have a policy currently, so don't worry. There's, we are working to some kind of rules and regulations around it, so we're not just winging it at the moment. But what we do, things are changing. So, people want different things from funerals, people want different things from burials and cremations, people want to put different things in memorial grounds, and they want different things now than they maybe did even 10 or 15 years ago. So it's about bringing what we do up to date and having that forward look about particularly what Sheffield looks like in 20 to 30 years, but also about what people want as well. So once we get approval from councillors and committee today, then we can start to wrap that up with some timescales.
Thanks. In the past, have we just dealt with really the legal aspects of burial, and this will add to it? Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, could just come in. Well, we have policy now in terms of the use of cemeteries. What I don't think we've got is that overarching strategy around how we manage it and what the future direction looks like. Absolutely, we do need timescales against these pieces of work. Rob's just started work on drafting what consultation might start to look like. So we need to get a little bit further before we can put any realistic timescales, I think, to things. But once the strategy's developed, what I would like to see is a delivery plan coming out of that and dedicated pieces of work within that, which will have their own timescales attached to them.
Thank you, and I think your point about timescales has been well heard. Councillor Riddler.
Thank you. Yes. I would heartily welcome this strategy. I think it's an incredibly positive thing. As somebody who also, with another hat on, works as a humanist funeral celebrant, I probably spend more time in crematoriums and burial grounds than hopefully most people here do. And as such, I am very aware of the need to modernise the service that we provide. I think that the private sector has really sort of begun to sort of own this area, really. They've become a lot more proactive and have really seized the opportunities to market themselves much better than we have done. And yet we do have responsibility to really sort of take this forward as well and to develop the initiative. There is a huge demand now, I can tell you, for natural burials from people. We need to be looking at that, which ties in with what we said about green spaces, environmentally friendly burials and cremations, as well as obviously the faith requirements that we're aware of. But I think anything that leads towards is perhaps taking a more proactive, better marketing, visibility of the council's offer, so that we're not actually perceived as being the poor relation to the private sector. I think it is only to be welcomed, and I think that from what I've seen and on the visits that we've done, I've been very reassured that we are very fortunate to have Elliot and that department who are really working hard to draw to bring us forward in this. So, as I say, it is something that I am particularly interested in, and very much welcome this. In terms of the buildings and the heritage, I do think that there are a lot of opportunities to work with friends groups, both in existing and in now in cemeteries that aren't well used, and That's something that I think we can explore as well, given a really positive approach towards working in partnership. So I would congratulate officers for what they are currently doing, and say that, you know, anything that I can do and anything that we can do to support them in what I think is a challenging area and a challenging task, but one that we owe it to the city to take forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riddler. Just to be clear for committee members, so Ellie's work will look at the open cemeteries, and then things like Ward's End Cemetery, the closed cemeteries, the general cemetery, they more fall within Ruth, Bells, Parks and Countryside area, but lots of synergy and lots of working together. So Ellie's strategy will cover open cemeteries, and then we work with Parks and Countryside to look at the closed cemeteries.
Thank you. Councillor McGowan.
I don't know what a closed cemetery is or whatever.
Doesn't take burials anymore. I'm trying to not use the word live. It
Right,
doesn't take burials anymore.
Right,
It's a closed cemetery in that respect.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just a bit confused because I thought we've just been talking about allotments and we're fighting for land for allotments, and now we're going to be fighting for land for burials. One thing that I've raised before, I think, and I've sent photographs through, was when my auntie died, and it was in Derbyshire, and we went to a heritage woods, and that just blew me away, how beautiful it was, and how, I was going to say money making, but that is the wrong thing to say about it, but you know, they paid for a tree, and when my uncle died, they had him there, and then when she died, we had to pay again for her to be put in, but then we had to change the plaque, so there was another cost for that. But the other thing I was going to say about it was there was a cafe and everything, so you could walk through these woods, and it was beautiful, and then you could go and stop and have a coffee and things. So I think there is something there about it's not always sad. And I would have really appreciated this when my dad passed away, because he had us putting his ashes on Stanage Edge, Derwent, and Yulegreave. We had to go and scatter his ashes. And well, it's... sue me now because it's 5 years ago, but yeah, I'm dragging my mum up there at 80 odd years old as well, so yeah, thanks Dad. But yeah, there is something about people want something different, and you know, we talk about, I was just going to say, linking up with Parks and Countryside, and about when we're tree planting, you know, I think there's just something there that we can link together and do something different.
Thank you. And yeah, we all agree. We think we need to be much more ambitious about what we can offer for people, with lots of ideas within the service itself, but I'm sure there's lots of ideas across the city. We need the support and the resources to do it, really. So we want to make sure that we hear that customer feedback, and then we can hopefully turn it into something new.
And the more income that we generate, the more we can invest back into the facilities that we offer. So it does feel a little bit of a dichotomy that you're generating income from such sadness, but actually if we can make sure that we do reinvest that back into the services that we offer, then there's a justification for doing that.
I think it's just not sadness on the day, it's about people going back and visiting and you know, having that experience when they're over the initial.
Thank you. Councillor Down.
Yeah, of course there is one certainty, isn't there? We're all going to die at some point, and the strategy is well overdue, really. I just wondered. I mean, cremations are one way of going now, but of course, people still want to be buried as they used to do years and years ago. And people's religion would require that. So, as I say, I welcome the report and the strategy that you're looking to now, and I think it's well overdue, and we should really crack on with that. And I agree. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to make a comment? Councillor Elliott.
Just a quick one. Obviously, there's no budget and no income, so hopefully things will change there, and the strategy will help bring things up to date. In terms of like promoting the services, I mean, there's nothing on the website. Is that something that we'll be looking into as well?
Absolutely. We've lost connection with the people who use our services, and we're not very good at promoting ourselves. We need to look at that in its entirety. I mean, the council's website itself is quite locked down in terms of being able to put information on there, but there's lots of other ways to engage and talk to people, and so that's absolutely something we want to really explore and progress further. You know, we invite people in for open days. You know, we want to have a service we're proud of, and we want to be able to show that off to people and the city. So, yeah.
And finally, Councillor Little.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking about what is the issue about putting graves on flood plains? Is there specific policies about that? And are they changing in the more and more areas are getting flooded?
So the rules around opening new cemeteries or extending cemeteries have changed, and there is quite a lot of requirements now in regards to groundwater and tanking that groundwater. So I'm afraid it's not as straightforward as maybe once upon a time it would have been, where you found a piece of land and dig a hole, in effect. We do have to manage the water, so that needs to be a big consideration when we're exploring potential sites.
Final question is about erosion of the land, and where, I mean, you could have presumably you could have a cemetery on a hillside, but there must be ideas about how you protect that land from eroding, so that, you know, it can be secure for the future. Will that be explored?
And we're going to explore all land that is potentially available to us, because, as we've already described, well, the problem with land is nobody's making it anymore. So we're all fighting for the same spaces. I think there's lots of opportunities for land. Ideally, you don't really want a burial plot on a hillside, because it makes it logistically a lot more difficult and challenging to dig graves. But there are other considerations too, in terms of you don't want woodland, you don't really want rocky land, you don't want wetland, and we live in Sheffield, so that's going to be a challenge. But we will explore all sites that are available to us. There is also consideration about greenbelt, because you can put cemeteries in greenbelts, but you have to be very considerate as to what infrastructure you might want on that site in terms of tarmacked lanes or toilets or anything else. So we need to keep an open mind at this stage, see what possible land, either council owned or otherwise, is available, and then explore the feasibility of it and put it forward as options.
Okay, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back on the previous point that we made about not shouting about and not really advertising the services. The website currently is locked down, but we need to get better at doing that. In 2022, our cremation service for the council was rated as excellent by the Federation of Burial and Cremation Authorities, which is a fantastic achievement. And our medical legal centre, so our coroner's service and our mortuary, received the High Sheriff's Award, which recognises people and community organisations and the work that they do. So we are, you know, we are recognised for the work that we do, but we don't necessarily promote that as far and as wide as we should do. And also there's the climate implications. So part of the work that Ellie and the team are going to be looking at is, you know, in the future, when our cremators are due for replacement, do we replace them like for like? Other alternatives, are they electric cremations and so on? And as we widen out the offer that we give to our customers in terms of how they might be buried or cremated, then also that also has positive impacts on the climate as well as, you know, so a traditional, where someone might want to be buried, there might be more options for them in the future than there are currently, which would take some of the pressure off the land as we currently feel it.
Okay, thank you. Although this item was technically under briefings, we have been asked to provide direction, and so we have some recommendations. The Communities, Parks and Leisure Committee is recommended to A, endorse the proposed work on the development of a bereavement strategy and new cemetery development, approve the establishment of a task and finish group to report back to the committee, which will be separated into individual focused thematic groups which examine defined areas of the strategy, e.g. burial provision for people of different faiths, or the role of cemeteries as natural green spaces, and B, delegate to the Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services authority to appoint the themed task and finish groups following an open invitation to all members of the Council to express an interest. Could you also note that the development of the strategy and work to explore new cemetery services provision will be overseen by this committee by way of regular progress updates before final approval is sought for the delivery plan? Are we all agreed?
Can I just come in and ask about if we're doing faiths and whether it can be opened up to all councillors, because I think we're a bit limited on this committee for taking into view everybody's thing. I just wondered there might be some councillors on council that might want to be involved.
On that basis, are we all in agreement? Okay, thank you. That's been unanimously approved. Thank you for your report, and congratulations, Rob, for your first representation. Okay, moving on, we have item 12, which ironically is an update on the work of the task and finish group. Councillor Elliott, are you going to give us some information?
Is that me? Okay, yeah. So just a quick recap about the task and finish group, what it's about, in case there's anyone who's changed over. So we're looking at the council's responsibilities as a landowner through the lens of the nature emergency. So like we started doing with climate change some years ago, and the background is that the council declared a nature emergency in 2021 due to the huge decline in species in this country. So we've had 2 sessions so far, and they've been really useful. We've been information gathering and having good discussions, mainly been about focusing on getting knowledge up amongst members and sharing knowledge across council departments, so joining up conversations to ensure that we've got a strategic approach. We've been hearing from ecologists, most importantly, the planning department and the sustainability team. We've invited external partners to the next session, so that's why we've not managed to have a 3rd session yet, because it's been quite tricky getting the dates in, but that's booked in for early December. Some tangible outcomes that will come out of the work that we've identified is that we will document what's been done to date so that the public know about what the council have done and why it's important. We will make recommendations to this committee around sort of holistic site management, so things like endorsing nature-based solutions wherever possible in parks, which ties in with flood works and natural flood management. We will endorse the need for a Sheffield green and blue infrastructure strategy. We'll be focusing on supporting priority habitat and species work like peatland restoration and wetland creation. That also helps to focus on external funding bids as well. We'll be looking at mowing regimes for spaces with grass on and creating ecotones, and providing a report on glyphosate use across parks and green spaces. So the task and finish work it'll tie into the update of the green and open spaces strategy, which is on our work committee plan for next year. But we've also recognised that this work, biodiversity, is a cross-cutting issue. So it doesn't just fall within this committee. So we need a holistic site management approach to go throughout the whole organisation, especially with biodiversity net gain coming in and the work happening under the local nature recovery strategy, which is being led by the South Yorkshire Mayoral Authority. So hopefully we will see ecology embedded into the climate impact assessments and embedded into decision making in the first instance, not as an afterthought. And we're also looking at communications and engagement, so that's internal awareness and understanding within the council and communication with people in Sheffield. So sharing information and images about actions, about nature recovery, and involving people along the way. So that's where we're at. I don't know if anyone in the group wants to share any sort of reflections, or if anyone not in the group wants to ask any questions.
I'm just aware that key ecologists we've got on the council have been unwell and not been able to contribute to date, and that's a serious omission. So I think that may account for the reason why we've not had the oomph behind us, as it were, so far. But I hope that will improve. But the work that they've done as ecologists in the city in the past have been, you know, absolutely welcome. And they're very much missed at the moment. So could we actually send something to, I think it's Angus, who is particularly unwell, and he's very much missed. Thank you.
Did you have any ideas what we should be sending him?
I just think a message and a card. Yeah.
I don't see why we can't do that. Thank you. I don't sit on your task and finish group, but I'm just interested, are you where you think you should be now, and has it gone the way you thought it would do when you started it?
No, Chair. I think when we entered into this, and the wide-ranging aspects, and the very low base that we've started from, I think, we've made some progress, but it's a massive project, really is. To give it justice, it's going to take some time.
I'd like to add my own assessment on it. The work that we've been doing, led by Councillor Elliott, has been amazing, kind of bringing everyone in. But with it being one of the first task and finish groups, I think this council has implemented, or we're quite an early task and finish group in the grand scheme of things. I do think it might be useful for other committees to kind of provide or look at us for kind of future learnings in terms of scope and kind of how we schedule it, how we make sure that people are included, because it is, as Councillor Hooper said, an absolutely massive ask, but one that we do need to be doing as a council.
With that in mind, would it be worth liaising with the bereavement services so that any learnings operationally, you've got the task and finish group, we can share with them when they set up theirs? Great. Did you want to come back? No.
I didn't really have anything to add. I think, you know, you've summed it up. It's just such a huge topic to tackle. You know, we've identified a few things that we think, you know, are perhaps tangible aims, but then recognising that there really needs to be, you know, an overall strategic look at it. So that doesn't necessarily fall within this committee. So there needs to be discussions on how the work can then influence the wider council.
Yes.
Thanks. And I think what might be helpful is, certainly as Councillor Elliott's described, this is huge, but it also incorporates many of the items that we bring to this committee. So, for instance, the Parks and Countryside Green and Blue strategy, bereavement strategy, the use of glyphosate, environmental climate statements and so on. So I think what we can do as officers to help is to progress this work and regularly update, talk to you and seek input from you to move these items forward as individual pieces of work, but also keeping that oversight of them all and linking them all together might help to kind of, they can do that to help and bring those items to you, then we certainly will do for discussion.
Thank you. And I think we note the report. Thank you very much. The final item today is item 8, which is a report on the 2024-25 budget savings for this committee. As we discussed, this may go into a private session if necessary, but at the moment it's open. If your questions or comments are drifting into the private section, then with guidance from yourself, we will go into that private session. But if you'd like to start, then Jason is speaking on behalf of Lorraine Wood, who is currently off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A little late in the day, but I'll introduce myself. So I'm Lisa Firth, I'm the Director of Parks, Leisure and Libraries. And yeah, as you mentioned, my colleague.
I'll introduce again for the purpose of the meeting. Jason Siddall, Head of Communities.
Thank you. So the report that I've brought to you is regarding the budget proposals for this committee for 2024-25. And the purpose of the report is to set out the financial pressures facing the Communities, Parks and Leisure Policy Committee and the proposed options available to the Council to offset these pressures. So on page 31 of the public report pack, which is page 3 of 9 of the budget report, section 1 of the proposal report asks members to approve the savings proposals. At 1.1 it states that the Strategy and Resources Committee considered the overall council budget situation and the pressures being faced by the council in their report in September of 2023. And this report gave an early view of the forecast financial position for the council for the medium-term financial analysis over the next 4 years. And it estimated a budget gap over that 4-year period of 61 million. Moving on to section 1.2, the summary of what I'm going to outline today leaves a budget pressure of 469,000 for the policy committee still to find for the 2024-25 budget, and I'll come on to explain a little bit more about that. So in terms of the budget pressures facing this committee for 24-25, as you're aware, there are my areas, which is Parks, Leisure and Libraries, and Community Services. So there's 2 functional areas that make up this policy committee. And the target savings were for the committee were 1.938 million. Majority of that was due to the pay award for employees for 2024 and the cost of addressing the ash dieback tree disease, which we brought a report to committee in June, I think, of this year. And also there's some loss of community safety team funding and some family hub staffing pressures, which Jason will go on to talk about later, and also some carried over pressures from the library and archive service from this year because we've not been able to mitigate those savings in this year. So breaking that down into the individual services, the amount for Parks, Leisure and Libraries was 1.3 million. The corporate centre, as we're referring to it, is covering off the pay award for 2024-25, so we don't have to find that. You may remember from members who were on this committee last year that we had to find that within the service. This year that's been funded corporately, so we don't have to find the amount to cover the pay award. So that leaves at section 2.2 an amount for my services in Parks, Leisure and Libraries of 625,000, and for colleagues in community services after their pay award has been mitigated, an amount of 92,000. And table 1, which is at 2.4 of the report, summarises those figures for you. And I'll just pause because I can see some furrowed brows, and I'll just let you catch up to table 1 where those pressures are set out. So that gives a summary of the pressures. There was also a contribution from the corporate centre from the medium-term financial analysis of 200,000 after the pay award had been allocated, and so we split that between Parks, Leisure and Libraries and communities proportionately as per the amount of their annual budget. So that meant that we could add an additional 132,000 to my services and 68,000 to community services to offset those pressures. Moving on to section 2.5, as heads of service and directors, we have identified additional in-service pressures that we know we're going to have to mitigate next year. And so we've included them in this report, because what we don't want to do is come to you as councillors and say that we have set a balanced budget when actually we know that there are additional costs that we're going to incur next year. Those costs are set out in table 2 at 2.5. So we know that there are additional service pressures in the medical, legal and coronial services of around 232,000. That includes items such as an increase in the cost of the histology contract to enable us to conclude post-mortems, and also the cost of employing our pathologists to carry out those post-mortems. The cost of those services have simply increased and our budgets have not increased in line with that, and so we're putting that into this paper and acknowledging a pressure. The amount that we have to pay in business rates, so any buildings that we occupy as services that aren't council, so such as Howden House or the Town Hall, we have to pay business rates, and our current budget for business rates is lower than the actual amount that we are charged, and so we're acknowledging that. We're covering that in year, but we want to acknowledge that as a pressure for next year. And colleagues in communities have also identified a loss of funding for the page hole team around the community work that is currently carried out, over 330,000. So they're the additional pressures that we've identified for next year. So if we move to section 2.6 in table 3, we have a cumulative pressure total of 875,000 for parks, leisure and libraries, and 354,000 for community services. And that gives a total for the committee of 1.229 million. In section 3 of the report, we've outlined some savings proposals. So as part of the medium-term financial analysis and the discussion and report that was taken to Strategy and Resources Committee in September, the Strategy and Resources Committee agreed a notional sales fees and charges increase in line with the September CPI of 5.4%. And the aim being to avoid possible subsidies for income generating services. And so what we've done is applied 5.4% to all fees and charges where that has been possible. If we move on to table 4, which is at section 3.2 of the report, gives you an indication of how much of the sales fees and charges we've been able to generate, which is largely in the parks, leisure and library services because there aren't any sales fees and charges in community services. So we've been able to find an additional 469,000 income to offset that pressure. We've not been able to apply 5.4% to all of our sales fees and charges. And the reason being that some of them are long-term lease arrangements that have already got set income and rental fees. Some of them we increased significantly last year, and so it wouldn't be appropriate to increase them significantly this year. And bereavement and coronial services, we've only added an amount of 45,000. That is not 5.4% of the income that we receive from our funeral and cremation services, but what we want to do is keep the majority of that increased income within bereavement services this year, so we can address some of those issues that we've already talked about today, particularly around service development, buildings and offering and transport and fleet management. So there is more information about those sales fees and charges set out in the closed report. I'll pause there.
Okay, Councillor McGowan, you wish to speak?
Yeah, there's just a couple of things. One, the Ash Dieback, when we had the presentation on that, I think one of our requests from here was to write to government because we weren't getting any funding. I wondered if that had happened and if we'd had a response, so that's one question. The other one was about this medico, legal, coronial. Why is it's not been an issue that's been raised previously, so, and I just don't understand why it suddenly popped up now when it didn't pop up last year, kind of thing. And then it would have been helpful to know about, you know, this 5% that you've put on all the charges, what that means now for libraries. What does it would be nice to have a list of what that means for the public and how much it's gone up. Okay.
please remind me if I don't cover off all those points. And I might bring Ellie in as well, just to give me a little bit more information if I don't answer the points fully. So in terms of the coronial service, medical legal centre, the cost of the histology contract and the pathologist, we did have a long-term provider of histology that we paid a set amount to each year for the contract. That contract came to an end in 2022.
The private company who delivered that contract for us served notice on the contract because it wasn't financially, it wasn't viable for them anymore. We went out to tender 3 times on that contract and failed to get an alternative provider, and eventually reached out to our local hospitals to help support us with that. And we have now got a contract with Sheffield Teaching Hospitals at a significantly increased cost to what we were paying previously.
Ali, do you want to also answer the point on the increase in cost for pathology as well, please?
So the coroner instructs pathologists to carry out post-mortem work on their behalf. We have a statutory duty to fund that provision of that service. The arrangements nationally with pathologists are difficult, that there are not enough of them, and the legislation around their pay arrangements is outdated, and the Ministry of Justice are looking at that at the moment, but I think it's going to take some time. We reached a crisis point locally, which was actually later than a lot of other authorities already reached a crisis point, where we simply didn't have any pathologists who were willing to work for the salary that they were being paid. So we entered into an agreement or discussion and then an agreement with them to increase the amount that they were being paid for the work that they did. And of course, unfortunately, the budget wasn't increased in line with that. It's probably also worth noting that I don't think it's mentioned in the report, but our jurisdiction covers Sheffield and Barnsley for a coronial perspective, with Sheffield acting as the lead authority. We offer digital autopsies for Sheffield residents where people have a scan and it reduces the need for an invasive post-mortem by over 70%. That wasn't on offer to Barnsley residents, which was completely inequitable, was a postcode lottery as to where you lived. With our new coroner, we managed to change that so that we now scan all Barnsley residents as well. That came into effect in April this year. It's been hugely well received, but because of the way the funding model is, Sheffield does pick up a chunk of that cost. And before everyone raises their eyebrows as to why, prior to that, Barnsley were paying towards our residents getting the service when they were not getting it. It's just the way the arrangement is set up. So we've had it good for a while on that front.
We do get a contribution from Barnsley for the service.
We do, yeah.
Yes, we did write. We wrote a letter and I don't think we've received a response. No, okay, Ruth and Rowan are shaking their head. There are grants currently being made available. I don't think we are eligible for those grants currently. Can you answer that or not, Rowan, or do we need to look at that? Okay, so just in case members didn't hear that, there's a lower tier authority. We are looking at that. We aren't eligible as a city council, but our colleagues in Bradfield, Stocksbridge and Ecclesfield parish councils may be eligible to claim grant funding for the trees that are affected in their area, in their parish area. So we are looking at that currently.
Does that, if they are successful, does that mean the money will come into the council?
Yes.
Thanks.
Sorry, it doesn't mean the money would come into the council, but what it does mean, it reduces our costs of dealing with those trees because we could access funding to do that. And in terms of the fees, that's set out currently in the closed part of the report. Okay.
Okay, that's a timely comment because I'm getting some advice that we're getting very close to the closed report. So if people are going to want more details, which I suspect they are, can I suggest we go into the closed report at this moment, if the members are happy with that? Yeah, in which case, it's up again. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, it's just to add, so the recommendation, I think, is clear in saying that it's for the committee to note and discuss the proposals. You're not being asked to approve them, although there is some text in the report which was highlighted to me as actually sort of is a stray request, as it were, for approval. We're not actually asking you to approve what's being proposed. It's for discussion. It will be at the next stage at S&R that approvals take place. So sorry for the mishap within the report. But it's I think it's section 1.1 mentions approvals, but that's incorrect.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Does that mean then that S&R make the decisions and not us? We just discuss it. I'm just a little bit, you know, if we're just discussing it and then you said it goes to S&R, who makes the decision about whether it gets approved?
As I understand it, we have a further report coming to us in December, which we will then say, yes, we're happy with that. Then that goes to S&R for final approval. But we're not going to send something to... Sorry, is that right?
Liz Goff, the Head of Finance Business Partnering. Just to confirm that Strategy and Resources make the recommendation to full council, so any full council that can approve the budget.
Thank you. In that case, there is a closed part of this item which is not available to the public and press because it contains exempt information described in paragraph 3 of the Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, relating to finance and business affairs. We are going to go into that closed session now. This committee acknowledges the recommendations approved at the Strategy and Resources Committee on 7th of September 2023, that policy committees will be asked to develop savings, additional income options that cover their own pressures. In effect, cash standstill, and to require policy committees to report at their meetings in November on how they can balance their budgets. 2, notes as this committee's response to the Strategy and Resources Committee's request, the set of budget proposals set out in the closed part B to this report. 3, notes that officers will now work with members to consult with relevant stakeholders, including with partners, staff, trade unions, and in respect of equalities and climate change, on the proposals in this report to inform final budget proposals. 4, notes that officers will work to develop any necessary detailed implementation plans for the proposals in this report so that the proposals can be implemented as planned before or during the 24-25 financial year. And finally, notes that a further report will be brought back to this committee in December 2023. Are we in agreement on that? That has been resolved unanimously. That concludes our agenda today. Thank you very much. I thought we might be out of here by 3:30, but it shows where I know. Actually, I don't want to... and thank you very much for your time and your questions and your comments. Thank you.